In this video, you're going to improve code you wrote in the previous video and get rid of the pyramid shape in your code, or what is called as the callback hell. So to do this, you're going to use promises. So the FS module comes with a nice API called FS promises. Now just bear in mind that this API is still at stability 1 at the moment, meaning that it is experimental. So as we're talking now, it is experimental, but hopefully very shortly it should be stable. So most features inside this API were added in version 10. Now, since we are running version 11, we should be okay. So to use this, you really need to be using version 10 or beyond that. All right, so let's go to our code and transform whatever we have written using callbacks to promises. So first of all, I'm going to summarize whatever we have written inside this code using some simple comments. So first of all, we have written inside our file Jupyter using write file. And then we read the content of our file Jupyter using read file. And then we logged the content into the console. Okay. And then after that, we appended some content to our file using append file. And after that, we read the content of our file again. And we logged that content to the console. And every time we run any of those operations, we had to write a callback, which takes care of the error and also introduced an else statement to carry on if everything goes fine. So if you write promises, then you're gonna catch the error right at the end. So if this is your promises code, then right at the end, you're going to have a catch statement where you're going to catch any error that might occur in your code. So let's go ahead and write our code using promises. So to use FS promises, you need to go to the FS object, which you set earlier to require FS, and go to promises. So this object comes with many methods, which are very similar to the ones you use directly with FS. So to write inside a file or override the contents of the file, you still use write file. Instead of write file of FS, it's going to be write file of fs.promises. Okay, so the syntax is very similar to the one you used before. But instead of having a callback, this is returning a promise. Okay, so you can use a then statement straight away. Now just make sure that you are comfortable with promises before diving into the remaining of this lecture. Otherwise, you can always go back to the ES6 section and review promises and then come back once you feel comfortable. Okay, so now once we have written into the file, we are going to read the content of our file. So to do this, we're going to pass a function inside the method then. Okay. And to read inside the file, we're going to use fs.promises.readFile. Now, we're going to return the content that we read inside the file. So we don't need curly brackets. Okay, so if you use the ES6 way, then whatever you're going to write here is going to be returned by this function. So fs.promises.read file, and we pass to this method the same parameters we passed earlier without the callback. Okay, so this is going to return a promise. So let's have another then statement. Now, once we read inside the file, we're going to have some content, which is the value of the data objects we had earlier. So in this new function, we're going to have a variable or parameter data for the function. And what we want to do, we just want to console.log Jupyter's content data. Like that. Okay. Now let's move to the next step, which is appending to our file. So we're going to use fs.promises.append file. Okay. So we're passing a function which doesn't take any parameters, and we're using fs.promises.append file. So append file is going to take the same parameters we used earlier without the callback, like that. Okay, so once we append into our file, we're going to read the file again. So you're going to use the same statements we have there. And then once we read, we want to console.log the content. So we're going to use both those statements. Okay, so we are right there. And now we just need to catch any errors. So to do that, we're going to use the catch statement, which takes as a parameter a function or callback, which will take care of the error. So you're going to have the error as the parameter, and we just want to log the error, and we can do something very similar to this, like that. And here we go. Okay, so let's comment this code, or let's just delete it. So again, we are using promises here, meaning that our code is asynchronous. So you'll see this line being printed first, and then your code running afterwards. Okay, so let's try this. And before doing that, let's just change the content of Jupyter. And then see it changing. So we're gonna run node of app promises, and here we go. Okay, so we're getting a warning here saying that FS Promises API is still experimental, and this is something we knew already. So first of all, you see the hello log because your code is asynchronous. And then we keep going. So we run other bits inside our code which belong to whatever we have done before. Okay, so this is coming from previous code. So the content of Jupyter at the beginning is I am learning code. So this is this line. And then the new content after appending to our file is this one, and we get the new line. It is so fun. Perfect. So our code is working perfectly. Now let's try our code with an error. So let's say that we read a file that does not exist. So let's try this. Okay, so we're getting an error here. So no such file or directory. And basically your code stops right there. It doesn't carry on further. So if you check your file Jupyter here, you'll find only the first content, I am learning Node. All right, because you couldn't, or the code couldn't go any further after that error. So this is very different from what you've done before when you were using the try and catch statements. So if you had just a try and catch statements, then it would have thrown an error and it would have carried on with the remaining of the code. But here it's very different when you have a catch statement attached to your promises like that, right at the end. Then it's going to catch the error and then it's going to stop right there. All right. Now there is something not very good about this way of doing a catch statement at the end of promises code, and that's the fact that we don't know where the error happened actually. So if you tried, for example, an existing file there instead of there, then you would get the same error. And it's not very clear whether that error happened in that line or in that line. So if you want to fix this, you can add a reject function instead of having only resolve functions. So what we're doing here, we're just passing the resolve function to the then method all the time, and then we're using a catch statement at the end. So instead of doing that, for example, when you're reading that file and then writing the then statement, you can pass two functions there, one for resolve and one for reject. So let's do this. So that's our first function. And then we can pass the reject function like that. So let's just copy this one. Like this. And let's just say error 1. And we're going to do the same thing right there. And let's call this one error 2. So if we try this code, we're supposed to get an error for this file that does not exist. So let's try this. So we get error 2. Now let's try the correct file there and try not there, .text right there and see what we get. So we get error 1. So you can customize the error if you like. So that's one way of making sure that you know where the error happened. Okay, so for now I'm going to keep things simple and I'm going to roll back to the generic mode of catching the error right at the end. Okay, so in the next video, you're going to write this code again, but this time you're going to use the ES7's async await.